Most self-improvement is organized around you, your goals, your growth, your optimization, your becoming. The self at the center, developing toward its own best version. And there is genuine value in this. The examined life, the cultivation of capacity, the honest work of becoming more fully what you are capable of being. But there is a question that most self-improvement frameworks either avoid or answer badly. Become your best self for what? For whom? The optimized self arrived at now does what exactly? The question of purpose, of the self's relationship to the people and community it exists inside, is where the modern improvement project tends to go quiet. Confucius had a completely different starting point. He did not begin with the self and ask how it could be improved. He began with the community, the family, the village, the society, and asked what kind of person that community needed. And then he built a philosophy of self-cultivation that is not about becoming your best self for its own sake. It is about becoming the person your relationships and community actually require. This reframe sounds simple. It changes everything. The specific dissatisfaction of the self-improvement project, the one that arrives after genuine progress, is not that the project failed. It is that the finished product has no obvious address. You have worked on yourself. You are more patient, more self-aware, more capable of managing your reactions and directing your attention. And now what? The gains are real. The sense of purpose that the gaining was supposed to produce has not quite materialized. Because purpose, it turns out, is not a property of the optimized self. It is a property of the relationship between the self and the world it is embedded in. Confucius understood this as the foundational error of any philosophy that begins with the self in isolation. The self does not exist in isolation. It exists in relationship, in the web of obligations, roles, and mutual dependencies that constitute the human community. And the cultivation of the self that ignores these relationships is not cultivation. It is, in the Confucian understanding, a sophisticated form of self-absorption. The genuine question is not, who am I becoming? It is, who does this family, this friendship, this community need me to be? And the answering of that question, the patient, demanding, lifelong work of becoming adequate to what your actual relationships require, is what Confucius meant by self-cultivation. Confu, known to the Western world as Confucius, a Latinization of Confuzi, Master Kong, was born in 551 BC in the state of Lu, in what is now Shandong province in northeastern China. He was born into minor nobility, but his family had fallen into poverty. His father died when he was 3. He grew up with his mother in modest circumstances, educating himself through the study of the ancient texts and rites that the Zhao dynasty had produced. He entered government service in his home state, eventually rising to positions of real influence. But his political career was never what he most hoped for. He wanted to find a ruler who would genuinely implement the principles of benevolent government, governance based on virtue, ritual propriety, and the cultivation of the ruler's own character as the foundation of the state's health. He never found that ruler. He spent 13 years traveling through the various states of China with his disciples, offering his services to different courts and being consistently, politely declined.
He returned to Lu in his late 60s and spent the last years of his life teaching. The disciples who gathered around him became the transmission of the teaching, and the Analects, the collection of his sayings recorded by those disciples, is the primary document from which the Confucian philosophy is reconstructed. He died in 479 BC, at 72. Disappointed by what he had not achieved politically and unaware of what he had achieved philosophically. His teaching would shape Chinese civilization for 2.5 millennia. It remains the most influential philosophical tradition in East Asian history. The Analects are not a systematic treatise. They are fragments, conversations, observations, responses to specific situations and specific students. The philosophy must be reconstructed from the pieces, and the reconstruction is the work of every reader who comes to them seriously. But the center of the philosophy is clear: the cultivation of the self in relationship, the becoming of the person that the human community, in its specific, local, concrete form, actually needs. Three concepts are at the heart of Confucian self-cultivation. Together, they constitute the most practically demanding philosophy of human development in the ancient world. The first is Ren, humaneness, benevolence, the quality of genuine care for others that is the foundation of everything else. Confucius was asked about Ren repeatedly by different students, and he gave different answers each time, which is not inconsistency, but precision. Ren is not a single property, but the fullness of human virtue in its relational expression. When asked for a single formulation, he gave the golden rule: do not do to others what you do not want done to yourself. But the negative formulation understates the positive demand. Ren is not merely the absence of harm, it is the active, specific, costly orientation of a person toward the genuine good of the people they are in relationship with. Ren cannot be cultivated in solitude. This is the point that distinguishes Confucian self-cultivation from every tradition that locates the work of development in the interior alone. Ren is developed through relationship, through the daily practice of genuine attention to the people you are actually with, the actual effort to understand what they need, the specific, demanding work of caring for someone else's development as seriously as you care for your own. The second concept is Li, ritual propriety, the ceremonial structure of human relationship. This is the concept that most Western readers find most foreign, and Confucius considered most important after Ren. Li encompasses the forms of behavior, the greetings, the ceremonies, the protocols of different relationships that structure human interaction and give it the stability from which genuine connection can grow. Confucius is not arguing for empty formalism. He is arguing that the forms matter because they train the person who practices them. When you bow to an elder, you are not merely being polite, you are practicing the orientation of the self towards something beyond itself, the specific discipline of a person who does not always lead, who recognizes the authority of experience and age and the accumulated wisdom of those who came before. The ritual is the rehearsal of the virtue. The form shapes the disposition that will eventually express itself naturally without the form. The third concept is Junzi, the exemplary person, the gentleman, the person who is developed sufficiently in Ren and Li that their character itself becomes a model. The Junzi is not perfect. Confucius is explicit about this. He never claimed to be Junzi himself. But the Junzi is the person whose cultivation has reached the point where their presence in the community is itself an education, whose way of being in relationship, the quality of their listening, the care of their speech, the seriousness with which they take their obligations, raises the level of the interactions they are part of.
The Junzi is the endpoint of Confucian self-cultivation. And crucially, it is an endpoint defined not by the self's achievement, but by the self's effect on others. You are not Junzi because you feel peaceful or because your practice is deep. You are Junzi when the people around you are better for your presence. Now the bridge. Because Confucius was working within the specific context of Zhou dynasty China, a feudal society organized around ritual hierarchy, filial piety, and the structures of the ancient state. But here is what translates directly. The parent who has been working on their own development and has begun to notice that their children are not better for it. The manager whose self-improvement has made them more self-aware, but not more genuinely useful to the people they lead. The partner who has become more emotionally literate but less present to the actual needs of the actual person they are with. These are Confucian problems. the cultivation that is not producing the effect that cultivation is for, the development that has remained at its center, organized around the self rather than the relationships the self exists inside. Confucius is not asking you to stop working on yourself. He is asking you to reorient the work, to take the community, the specific, concrete, messy, demanding community of your actual relationships as the standard against which the cultivation is measured. Not, am I becoming more peaceful, but is the family more at ease for my presence? Not, is my practice deepening, but are the people I work with better served by who I have become? The reorientation does not make the work easier, it makes it more alive, because it gives the work an address. And addressed work, Confucius spent his life insisting, is the only kind that actually cultivates what it is trying to cultivate. Here is what Confucius asks of you today. First, identify the relationship that most needs you to grow. Not the relationship that is most rewarding, the one that is most demanding, the one where the gap between who you currently are and who the relationship needs you to be is most visible. The parent who needs more patience than you currently have, the colleague who needs a quality of attention you have not yet developed, the friend whose genuine well-being requires an honesty that costs you more than convenience currently allows.
This relationship is the curriculum. The self-cultivation that Confucius prescribes is not general, it is specific to the actual, present, irreplaceable demands of the relationships you are in. What do you need to become to serve this relationship well? That is the question the practice is organized around. Second, find the ritual that rehearses the virtue. Confucius believed that behavior shapes disposition, that you do not wait until you feel the virtue to perform its forms. You perform the forms until the virtue becomes natural. The parent who does not feel patient practices the external forms of patience, the slower speech, the full attention, the pause before responding, until the practice reshapes the internal reality. Identify one relationship and one virtue that relationship needs from you. Then find the form, the specific, repeatable daily behavior that rehearses that virtue, not as performance, as the Confucian understanding that the form is how the virtue is built, the bow that teaches the bowing, the listening that teaches the listening, the pause that teaches the patience. Third, measure your cultivation by its effect. Once a week, not more. The self-examination that becomes obsessive is its own problem. Ask the Confucian question, not how has my practice developed? Are the people in my immediate circle better for my presence this week? Is the family more at ease? Is the team more effective? Is the friendship more honest? If yes, the cultivation is working. If no, it has not yet found its address. Something in the development is still organized around the self rather than the relationship. Find what it is and reorient. Fourth, practice Ren in one specific encounter today. Not as an abstraction, in one conversation with one actual person, bring the full Confucian weight of Ren, the genuine, specific, costly attention that asks, what does this person actually need from this encounter? Not what do I want to give them, what do they need? This is harder than it sounds. Most conversations are organized at some level around what we want to express, establish, or accomplish. The Confucian conversation is organized around the other, their genuine good, their actual development, the specific, local, concrete thing that genuine care for this particular person in this particular moment requires.
Do it once today. Notice what it produces, in them and in you. I want to close with the image of Confucius that I return to most often, not the revered sage of later tradition, the traveler. 13 years, moving through the states of China with his disciples, offering his philosophy of benevolent governance to rulers who found it impractical, inconvenient, or simply less useful than the alternatives. Being refused, moving on, not with the bitterness of the person whose genius goes unrecognized, or not only with that, but with the specific, patient, philosophically grounded persistence of a person who believed that the cultivation of virtue was worth practicing regardless of whether the powerful were willing to implement it. He did not find the ruler, he found the disciples, and through the disciples he found the civilization that would carry the teaching for 2.5 millennia. The community he was trying to serve was not the court that kept refusing him. It was the students around him, the actual, present, irreplaceable human beings who were shaped by his daily practice of Ren, by the way he listened, the care with which he answered, the seriousness with which he took each person's genuine development. That is the Confucian practice in its most available form, not the reform of the state, the quality of attention brought to the person in front of you, the daily, unglamorous, entirely serious work of becoming more adequate to what the actual, present, irreplaceable relationships of your actual life require. The Junzi is not built in the study, it is built in the encounter, in the bow that means something, in the conversation where someone is genuinely heard, in the long, patient, relationship-by-relationship cultivation of the person that your community, your specific, concrete, sometimes maddening, entirely irreplaceable community needs you to be. Here is the question Confucius leaves us with today. Who in your immediate circle needs you to be different from who you currently are? Not in the abstract, specifically. The parent who needs more patience from you. The colleague who needs more honesty. The friend who needs more genuine presence. And what is one thing you could practice today, one form, one behavior, one specific act of Ren that would move you, even slightly, toward becoming the person that relationship actually needs? Leave that in the comments, because naming the relationship and the practice is the beginning of the cultivation Confucius spent his life describing, not the self becoming its best version, the self becoming adequate to the people it loves. I'll see you in the next one.